I do today's video not on a article, not on a video, but rather a topic. Let's have a talk about bias. First off, as always, links to relevant articles and cited works will be in the description box below. The kind of bias I want to cover today is, of course, that of political bias. Any of those not living under a rock for the past few years are aware of this. Now keep in mind, I say a few years, I don't mean 2 or 3, I mean, well, decades. But I'm referring to, of course, especially in regards to the media. Now, I'm going to blatantly say here that I don't believe someone can be completely devoid of bias. We all have it. But of course, much like everything else, some are more guilty than others. I point to this from the Washington Post as an example. Now, the Washington Post presents the fairness doctrine in almost its entirety. The biggest thing to note in that sentence is almost. And I present this. The part that was left out by the Washington Post is kind of important as it is under the Commission's oversight what is deemed as opposing sides of issues. Now, I'm a little bit of a misanthrope and a cynic, but bear with me. I just can't trust a group of humans flawed in their nature to remain ardently fact-driven. In fact, actually, I expect them to be quite the opposite, as feels usually do end up getting involved in some way, shape, or form with just about everything in this world. But that's just the frontal lobe talking. But I digress. Let's continue down this path, shall we? I'm not here to delve into the fairness doctrine as a form of legislation passed down by the FCC, but if you're interested, I did find this particular article to have an interesting take on the document, and I'll leave the link in the description below. If I'm being honest, while I may find it flawed, I do believe that the intentions were well-mannered and it is no longer in effect as of 2011 officially. I am instead here to repeal the idea that any one or group of media outlets are devoid of their own inherent biases. Now, there's more to this than simply lying, but lying isn't off the table, mind you. It can also come from not telling the whole truth, or telling a half-truth, as some prefer to call it, and of course the usage of unverified and, at times, malicious sources. A good example of this is the CNN Russian dossier debacle not that long ago. But all laughing aside and pushing down the cries of fake news, a question must be asked. Well, a few questions, actually. Not only how many times has this happened, but also, how many times has this happened and no one brought to light the truth? I can also bring up the whole K-file issue that happened with the Reddit member that got doxxed. Well, didn't get doxxed, but or threatened to be doxxed by CNN if they continued their actions. But of course, that is a topic I have already covered. But overall, once again, you have to ask, how many times has it happened and no one has found out about it, and the individual may have had information on them that was against them or whatever. But the answer to both of those questions is the ones that I followed afterwards, while unnerving, is a lot, at least in the two former questions. Am I saying that every news article from every news site is an equivalent to the Russian dossier debacle? No. But I am pointing out that it does happen. And of course, there is my previous comment about not presenting the whole truth, which when done not out of ignorance but for political purposes, tends to be quite malicious. Because, well, with the right amount of wording, a select image, and cuts of footage, you can paint whatever picture about a political adversary you wish to paint. A recent example of this is when Trump signed a hat and seemingly callously threw it into the crowd, when in reality he was throwing it back to the kid who handed it to him. So, why the deception? Well, frankly, most mainstream media outlets were banking on Hillary Clinton win in 2016, and Trump winning essentially was a clear indication to them that their obvious bias was out in the open. Of course, the media's coverage of Clinton wasn't all pleasantries either, but though while the Clinton emails and other scandals were aired alongside Trump scandals, namely the ones regarding his taxes, and, well, frankly, Trump scandals were just less interesting to the populace, Also, Trump released his taxes, and it turned out that he paid more than Obama and Bernie. So that was funny. The reality is everyone has their biases, and pretending like any news outlet is inherently less biased than the next is ignorant. After all, media was still biased when the fairness doctrine was in place. But in light of Trump's election, I have a message for the media. If you really want to tackle Trump, rather than writing every single one of Trump's idiotic tweets into an article and making a big spectacle of it, upping his media exposure, and quite frankly making yourselves look out to be worse than he is in the end of the day, how about you fairly represent what he's doing and wait for him to fuck up? After all, the outrage over Jerusalem being named the capital of Israel is pretty damn funny. But I covered that whole topic in a previous video, and you can find that one on my channel if you're feeling curious. But anyway, to avoid from repeating myself more than I already do, I'm going to call this video done. And I hope that my overall theme is well displayed here. When it comes to the media, especially the major mainstream ones, it's okay to read what they say, but always verify, even if it seems to be authenticated by a video or tweet, because, as I've mentioned, it doesn't take a whole lot to twist the truth and events into a political side's favor. But doing this doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing it with a malicious intent. They might just simply be ignorant to the matter, as people tend to be. I mean, if you walk into a situation after the majority of events have already occurred, and you start filming, not necessarily a documentary, but start doing reporting on it, and you're only getting the last half of a truth, and you only report the half truth, you didn't do that with a malicious intent. You only did that because that's what you knew. But I digress. With all of the recent, don't we say, demolition of mainstream media, I feel that things are going to come to a head at one point where the media realizes that A, the lies are very easily, proven wrong, and in the situations where they're not lying but telling a half-truth, if they did it simply because of an ignorant journalist, then it needs to be corrected. However, if they did it with a malicious intent, it needs to be removed. But journalism is, at its core, part of what makes the United States and the concept of free speech so important. But I am going to call this video done and, quite frankly, move on to the rest of my evening. Anyway, in regards to that, I am back on my regular schedule, so barring any major weather-related internet outages or personal issues, I will be seeing you glorious cunts next Tuesday. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, and or night.